Welcome to Crossdressing Stories. Here, we share personal stories, celebrate self-expression. If you're on your own journey or simply curious, you've found your community. Subscribe and join the conversation.
The old Plymouth Valiant was more rust than paint, and the steering wheel trembled in my hands like a nervous animal, but it was mine. Every mile I put between myself and that silent, suffocating trailer felt like a year of my life being handed back to me. The engine roared, a constant, droning protest against the night, but to me, it was the sound of liberation. I drove with the windows down, the cool North Carolina air of late May rushing in, carrying away the ghosts of disapproving glances and the suffocating weight of my father's silence. For hours, my world was just the twin beams of my headlights cutting a tunnel through the darkness and the white dashes of the highway flying hypnotically toward me. I didn't let myself look in the rearview mirror. I knew I wouldn't see my father's silhouette in the doorway, but I would feel it. Instead, I focused on the moment the air changed, when the earthy smell of pine and damp soil gave way to something sharper, something electric and alive. Salt. It was the promise of the ocean, a scent you could taste on your tongue long before you saw the water. When I finally pulled into the gravel lot by the Carolina Beach Pier, the sky was still a deep, starless indigo. I killed the engine. The sudden silence was immense, broken only by the rhythmic, percussive crash of waves against the shore, a sound that was both a lullaby and a battle cry. I didn't get out. I just sat there, my hands still gripping the wheel, feeling the vibrations of the journey slowly fade from my bones. This was it. The edge of the continent. The end of the road I'd been on and the start of, what? The thought was both exhilarating and utterly terrifying. Freedom, I was learning, felt a lot like standing at the edge of a cliff. As the horizon began to bleed from black to a bruised purple, I leaned forward, looking at my own reflection in the dusty rearview mirror. Tired, shadowed eyes stared back at me. This was the moment. With a hand that trembled almost imperceptibly, I reached into my bag and pulled out the new tube of lipstick. It wasn't the soft, crimson kiss of my past. This was a shade called Vixen, a deep, unapologetic red. The click of the tube opening was the only sound in the car. I carefully, deliberately, painted my lips, the waxy, crayon-like scent filling the small space. It was a war paint. A declaration. A promise. I watched as the sun finally broke the water's edge, a wound of brilliant orange that spilled across the gray waves, shattering the darkness. And in the mirror, in the new light of my first day, I saw a stranger I was finally ready to meet. The face was familiar, but the expression was new. It wasn't the face of Alex, the boy who hid. It was the face of Lex. And she was home. Richie's recreation was a cathedral of noise and smoke, and walking back into it felt like a homecoming. The air, thick with the smell of stale beer, fryer grease, and pool chalk, was an incense I had missed more than I realized. The place was a living museum of lost things, lost quarters swallowed by pinball machines, lost games of 8-ball on felt scarred with cigarette burns, lost hours that melted away under the hum of neon lights. This was where I would make my stand. Ethan spotted me from across the room, a pool cue resting on his shoulder. His easy surfer's grin widened, and he weaved through the tables to greet me. "I knew you'd show," he said, his voice a warm, welcome sound against the din. "Told you this place needed you." He didn't ask about my family or where I'd been. He just accepted my presence as fact, a new piece on the board. He brought me over to Rick's office, a cluttered corner behind the bar where a mountain of paperwork fought for space with a perpetually half-empty coffee pot. Rick was a bear of a man, his face a roadmap of late nights and tough crowds, but his eyes held a surprising clarity. He looked me up and down, his gaze lingering for a moment on my silver hoop earrings and the faint, defiant sheen of my lipstick. I braced myself for a comment, a test. It never came. "Thompson called me this morning," Rick grunted, his voice like gravel. "Said he never saw a kid clear a drain trap so fast in his life. Said you worked like you had something to prove." He took a long drag from his cigarette, smoke curling from his nostrils like a weary dragon. "I don't care what you do in your own time, Lex. Here, you show up on time, you don't steal from the register, and you don't start fights you can't finish. You think you can handle that? Yes, sir, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Good, he said, crushing the cigarette out in an overflowing ashtray. Ethan will show you the ropes. Your first shift is Friday. Don't be late. As Ethan led me away to show me the stock room and the temperamental ice machine, a profound wave of relief washed over me, so potent it almost made my knees weak. It wasn't just the job. It was Rick's transactional indifference. He hadn't seen a boy or a girl. He hadn't seen a problem or a project. He'd seen an employee, a set of hands to do a job. In his world of cracked vinyl and spilled beer, my secrets didn't matter. Only my work did. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't being tolerated or judged, but simply hired. And that felt more like acceptance than anything I had ever known. The room I shared with Derek was exactly as I had left it, a small, transient space that smelled perpetually of salt air and Old Spice. Derek was sitting on the floor, meticulously cleaning the gears of a fishing reel, a picture of focused calm. He looked up as I walked in, lugging the single duffel bag that contained my entire life. A slow, easy smile spread across his face. Figured you'd be rolling in soon, he said, wiping his greasy hands on a rag. Engine on that old boat of yours hold up? She made it, I said, dropping the bag with a heavy thud. The sound seemed to finalize my arrival. I was here. This was real. Welcome home, then roommate, he said, his gaze genuine and warm. We fell into an easy rhythm that evening, the kind of comfortable silence that only exists between people who have already weathered a storm together. He talked about a new charter boat captain he was trying to get work with. I talked about the rusty ice machine at Richie's. But as the sun went down, casting long shadows across the room, I knew I couldn't just slide back into the old dynamic. The person who had left this room wasn't the same person who had returned. I took a deep breath. Derek, I began, my voice feeling strangely formal in the small space. We need to talk. About me. He put down the reel and gave me his full attention, his expression open and patient. There was no judgment in his green eyes, only a quiet readiness to listen. It gave me the courage to continue. I didn't tell him about the dresses or the paddle or the years of hiding. That was the history of Alex. I told him about the future of Lex. I told him about the lipstick and what it meant. I told him that I wasn't a boy who liked feminine things. I was something else, something I was still trying to define, but that he was a pronoun that felt like a scratchy wool sweater on a hot day. I told him I wanted to live honestly, at least within these four walls. I finished, the silence in the room humming with the weight of my confession. I had laid all my cards on the table, terrified he would flinch or, worse, laugh. He was quiet for a long moment, just looking at me. Then he nodded, a slow, deliberate motion. Okay, he said simply. So, Lex. That's the name now? All the time. All the time, I confirmed, my voice barely a whisper. The relief was a physical thing, a loosening in my chest. All right, Lex, he said, picking the reel back up as if we had just been discussing the weather. His casual acceptance was the greatest gift he could have given me. New roommate contract, then. You still have to clean the bathroom. I'm still on trash duty. And for God's sake, try not to hog all the hot water. Deal? Deal, I said, a real, unburdened smile spreading across my face for the first time all day. We didn't shake on it. We didn't need to. Some contracts aren't written down. They're forged in shared trust and spoken into the quiet spaces between friends. My first paycheck from Richie's wasn't much, a flimsy envelope with a handful of cash inside, smelling faintly of cigarette smoke. But as I fanned the bills out on the worn quilt of my fold-down sofa, it felt like a fortune. It was the currency of freedom, every dollar a brick in the new life I was trying to build. But freedom, I was quickly discovering, had expenses. Rent. Gas for the valiant. Food that didn't come from a vending machine. The numbers in my head were a constant, humming anxiety. The first major purchase wasn't for me, but for the car. The Valiant had developed a cough, a rattling shudder every time I came to a stop. I took it to a grimy, back-alley garage where a mechanic named Sal, with grease permanently etched into the lines of his hands, told me I needed a new water pump. The price he quoted was nearly 2/3 of my rent. My heart sank. The car wasn't just transportation, it was my escape plan, my guarantee that I could never be trapped again. I spent the next 2 days in a state of quiet panic, working my shifts at Richie's with a forced smile while my mind raced. I ate cheap, saltine crackers and instant coffee for breakfast, a hot dog from the roller grill for dinner. I walked everywhere I could, hoarding every drop of gasoline in the Valiant's tank. On the third day, Derek came home from a long shift on the docks, smelling of fish and brine, and found me staring at my dwindling pile of cash. "You look like you're planning a bank heist," he said, grabbing a beer from our tiny, rattling fridge. "Worse," I said. "Car repairs." He listened as I explained the situation, the frustration and fear evident in my voice. He took a long swallow of beer, then looked at me. "I've got a little saved up," he said, his tone casual, as if he were offering me a piece of gum. "From that last charter. It's not much, but it might be enough to cover you. Pay me back when you can. No rush." I was stunned. "Derek, I can't ask you to do that." "You're not asking, I'm offering," he said firmly. "Look, Lex. Out here, your crew is your lifeline. Sometimes you throw the rope, sometimes you catch it. Today, you catch it." He went to his dresser, pulled out a small, worn leather pouch, and counted out a wad of wrinkled bills onto the table. It was more than enough. I stared at the money, a lump forming in my throat. It wasn't just cash. It was trust. It was a tangible, undeniable piece of evidence that I wasn't alone in this. I had spent so much of my life feeling like I was on an island, and here was someone, without question or hesitation, building a bridge. I pushed the money back towards him. "I can't take it all," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "But if you could just lend me half, I can make up the rest by next week." He considered it for a moment, then nodded. "All right, half it is." That night, after paying Sal for the new water pump, I lay awake on the lumpy sofa, listening to the familiar sounds of the rooming house. For the first time, the anxiety in my chest had been replaced by something else, something warm and solid. It was the feeling of having a safety net, not of money, but of friendship. I was broke, exhausted, and my hands smelled of industrial-grade soap from the bar, but I felt richer than I ever had in my life. With the Valiant patched up and a fragile financial stability established, a new kind of routine settled in. Work at Richie's was the solid ground beneath my feet, a predictable rhythm of stocking coolers, wiping down sticky tables, and racking balls for sunburnt tourists and grizzled locals. But my free time was a vast, uncharted territory. During the day, while Derek was out on the boats, the small room felt cavernous and silent. The four walls that had initially felt like a sanctuary now sometimes felt like a cage. My father's final threat echoed in the quiet moments: "You are out of this house the second you turn 18. I had walked out willingly, but the word "out" still felt like an exile. My fear had a new geography. It wasn't the fear of a paddle or a disapproving glare down a narrow hallway. It was a quieter, more insidious fear, the fear of the void. The fear of being utterly and completely alone, of being a ghost no one would miss if I simply drifted away. To combat it, I started walking. I explored Carolina Beach with the meticulous attention of a cartographer mapping a new continent. I learned the back alleys, the shortcuts between the tourist traps, the exact spot on the pier where the wood was softest and the view of the sunset was unobstructed. I learned the names of the stray cats that hung around the fish markets and the daily schedule of the old man who flew elaborate kites on the beach every afternoon. I was trying to anchor myself to the town, to weave myself into its fabric so I couldn't be easily blown away. One sweltering afternoon, I found myself drawn back to Safariland, the kitschy mini-golf course from the previous summer. The giant, muscle-posing gorilla statue seemed to loom over the boardwalk, a monument to manufactured fun. On a whim, I paid the fee and took a putter and a faded green ball. I was on the 7th hole, a complicated shot that required banking the ball off a plaster hippo, when a voice behind me said, "You're holding the putter wrong. You're gonna slice it into the water trap." I turned. It was Chloe, the police chief's daughter. She looked different than I remembered from that terrifying night in the hotel room. Here, in the bright sunlight, with her hair tied back and a mischievous glint in her eye, she just looked like a girl from the beach. "Excuse me," I said, my hand tightening on the putter. The sight of her brought a phantom chill, the memory of cold metal on my wrists. "Your grip," she said, stepping forward. "You're choking it like it owes you money." She gently adjusted my hands on the rubber grip. "Loosen up. Let the club do the work." Her touch was light, professional. "My dad's an obsessive golfer. I've had this lesson 1,000 times." The casual mention of her father sent a jolt through me. I stepped back, putting a little space between us. "Thanks for the tip," I said coolly. She seemed to sense the shift, her smile faltering slightly. "Hey," she said, her voice softer. "I never got to say I was sorry about, that night. My dad, he can be." She trailed off, searching for a word. "A nightmare," I supplied, the bitterness sharp on my tongue. "Yeah," she admitted, looking down at her worn sneakers. "That? He was wrong." "And what I said to him. I hope it didn't cause you any more trouble." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not the daughter of my tormentor, but a young woman who had also, in her own way, been living under the shadow of a difficult man. My defensiveness softened. "No," I said quietly. "You didn't cause any trouble. You probably saved me." An awkward silence fell between us, filled only by the sound of the pump circulating water through the plaster hippo's mouth. I was still scared, but the fear was slowly being replaced by a grudging curiosity. I had spent weeks trying to outrun the ghosts of my past, and here, one of them had just offered me a putting lesson. "So," Chloe said, breaking the silence as she gestured with her own putter toward the green. "Are you going to try the shot, or are we just going to stand here and admire the fine craftsmanship of this concrete pachyderm?" Her attempt at humor was disarming. I took a breath, stepped up to the ball, and adjusted my grip as she'd shown me. The club felt looser, more natural in my hands. I tapped the ball. It rolled in a gentle arc, banked perfectly off the hippo's flank, and disappeared into the cup with a satisfying clatter. "See," she said with a triumphant grin. "What did I tell you?" Despite myself, I felt a smile crack my face. "Okay, fine. You were right." We ended up playing the rest of the course together. It was a strange and stilted truce at first, our conversation carefully avoiding the landmine of her father, and that night. We talked about music, about the terrible summer tourist crowds, about the best place to get a slice of pizza on the boardwalk. It was normal, surface-level stuff, but beneath it, I felt a silent negotiation taking place. I learned that she was working as a waitress at a tourist-trap seafood restaurant, saving money with a vague plan to escape to anywhere but here. As we putted on the final hole, the one dominated by the giant gorilla, she paused before her shot. My dad hasn't mentioned that night once," she said, her back to me. "Not a single word. He just pretends it never happened. That's how he deals with things he can't control. He erases them." The statement hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. She was telling me I was safe, that her father's wrathful gaze was no longer pointed in my direction. She was also telling me something profound about her own life, about the suffocating power of denial. "He does the same thing with me," she continued, finally turning to face me. "He sees what he wants to see. A daughter who will go to community college here, marry some local boy he approves of, and give him grandkids. He refuses to see the person who is counting down the seconds until she can get away." She looked directly at me then, and her eyes held a flicker of recognition, a shared understanding of what it felt like to be seen as something you're not. "I get the feeling you know what that's like." In that moment, she ceased to be the police chief's daughter. She became something else, an ally. We were two very different people, trapped on the same small island, living under the shadow of two very different, but equally powerful, patriarchs. We were both experts in the art of the hidden self. "Yeah," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I know exactly what that's like." We finished the game, and as we were returning our putters, she turned to me. "Hey, Lex. A bunch of us from the restaurant are having a bonfire on the beach tonight. Down past the old pier. Nothing crazy, just some music and cheap beer. You should come." It was a peace offering. An invitation into her world, away from the ghosts of ours. Part of me wanted to say no, to retreat back to the safety of my room and the predictable solitude. But another part of me, The part that had watched the sun rise and painted its lips with vixen red knew that hiding was no longer an option. Hiding was what Alex did. Lex showed up. "Okay," I said. "I'll be there." The beach at night was a different world. The familiar landscape of sunbathers and colorful umbrellas was gone, replaced by a vast, echoing darkness broken by the white foam of the surf and the distant glitter of stars. I found them easily, a small circle of figures silhouetted against the flickering orange light of a bonfire. The sound of a softly strummed guitar and low laughter carried on the salty breeze. Walking toward them felt like approaching the camp of a foreign tribe. My steps were hesitant on the cool sand. Chloe saw me first and waved me over, her smile a welcome beacon in the gloom. The group was a mix of servers, cooks, and dishwashers from her restaurant, all young, all radiating the specific, weary energy of people who spend their days catering to tourists. They greeted me with a casual, unquestioning acceptance. I was Chloe's friend, and for tonight, that was enough. I took a seat on a weathered piece of driftwood, a proffered beer can cool in my hand. For a while, I just listened, a quiet observer on the fringe of their circle. They traded stories from their shifts, rude customers, kitchen disasters, meager tips. It was a familiar language, a dialect of the service industry I had learned well at the captain's table and Richie's. I found myself chiming in with a story about a tourist who tried to pay for a game of pool with a seashell, and the circle of laughter that followed felt warm and inclusive. Chloe sat beside me, hugging her knees to her chest. "See? Not so bad, right?" she murmured, her voice low enough that only I could hear. "It's all right," I admitted. Later, the guy with the guitar, a lanky cook named Marcus, started playing a familiar melody. It was a soulful, melancholic song about leaving home. As his voice, rough but heartfelt, filled the night, a comfortable silence fell over the group. Everyone seemed to be lost in their own thoughts, staring into the hypnotic dance of the flames. The fire crackled, spitting embers into the dark sky like fleeting, earthbound stars. In the flickering light, I felt a strange sense of belonging, but also a sharp, poignant awareness of my own duality. To this group, I was Lex, a quiet, long-haired kid who worked at the pool hall. They saw the earrings, the thrift store clothes, the slightly androgynous frame, and filed me away under a convenient label, artistic, maybe a little shy. They didn't see the years of fear, the carefully constructed personas, the girl in the mirror who was both my truest self and my deepest secret. They didn't know the war I had fought just to be able to sit here, on this beach, as myself. As the song ended, Chloe leaned in again. "You're a hard person to read, you know that?" "What do you mean?" I asked, turning to look at her. Her face was half in shadow, half illuminated by the firelight, her expression serious. "It's like, you're here, but you're also a million miles away," she said, choosing her words carefully. "Like you're always watching, always calculating, always ready to run." Her observation was so accurate it felt like a physical blow. She saw it. She saw the ghost of the boy who was always looking over his shoulder. She saw the escape artist. For a second, the old Alex instinct screamed at me to shut down, to deflect with a joke, to retreat into my shell. But I was tired of running. "When you spend your whole life checking for escape routes," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "it becomes a hard habit to break." She held my gaze, and in her eyes I saw that flicker of recognition again, deeper this time. She nodded slowly, an unspoken acknowledgement passing between us. She didn't press for details. She didn't need to. In the shared language of survivors, the echo was enough. We were both just trying to find a place where we could finally stop looking for the exit. The bonfire became a weekly ritual, a steady point in the chaotic orbit of my new life. My friendship with Chloe solidified, forged in the quiet moments between raucous stories and shared beers. It was an alliance built not on shared histories, but on a shared understanding of what it meant to navigate the world in a body that didn't always feel like your own, under a name that didn't tell the whole story. One blistering afternoon, she convinced me to skip my usual solitary walk and actually go in the ocean with her. "You live at the beach," she'd said, rolling her eyes. "It's a requirement." I was hesitant. My last real experience with the ocean had been that disorienting, terrifying baptism by wave the previous summer. But I found a pair of cheap, cut-off shorts at a thrift store and followed her down to the surf. The water was shockingly cold at first, then bracingly alive. Chloe moved through the waves with the effortless grace of someone born to it. She dove under breakers, her body a sleek, dark shape against the green water, and resurfaced with a gasp and a laugh, shaking water from her hair like a seal. I was clumsy, hesitant, constantly bracing for the next onslaught. "You're fighting it," she yelled over the roar of a wave. "Stop trying to stand your ground. The ocean is always going to win." She grabbed my hand. "Watch. When a big one comes, you don't fight it. You dive into it. You let it roll over you." Her hand in mine was warm and firm. I watched her, and when the next wall of water rose up before us, I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and dove forward with her. For a moment, there was chaos, a roaring, tumbling, weightless confusion of green and white and pressure. But instead of panic, I felt a strange sense of release. I wasn't fighting anymore. I was part of the chaos. We surfaced together, sputtering and laughing, my hair plastered to my face. "See," she shouted, her eyes bright with triumph. "You can't control it. You just have to move with it. Be like water." Her words hit me with the force of the wave itself. Be like water. All my life, I had been a rock, trying to stand firm against the relentless tide of my father's expectations, of society's rules. I had braced myself, resisted, and been worn down by the effort. The long-haired hippie persona, the tough act at Richie's, they were all forms of resistance, rigid defenses against a world I saw as a threat. But what if Chloe was right? What if the answer wasn't to resist, but to yield? To be fluid, adaptable, to find my own shape within the current instead of being broken by it? Later, as we lay on our towels, the sun warming our salt-sticky skin, I looked over at her. "Thank you," I said, "for the lesson." She smiled, her eyes closed against the glare. "Anytime. What are friends for?" It was the first time either of us had used that word. It settled between us, comfortable and real. Lying there, with the sound of the ocean in my ears and the warmth of the sun on my face, I felt a profound shift inside me. The rigid defenses I had built around myself for years suddenly felt less like armor and more like a cage. And for the first time, I felt the desire not just to escape it, but to dissolve it entirely. I didn't want to be a rock anymore. I wanted to be like the water, powerful and uncontainable, finally free to take my own shape. The lesson from the ocean began to seep into my life on land. I started to let the rigid persona of Lex, the tough, quiet pool hall guy, soften at the edges. I found myself smiling more at work, joking with Ethan over the broken foosball table, even engaging in small talk with the regulars instead of just silently collecting their money. It was a subtle shift, but it was liberating. I was tired of the constant vigilance it took to maintain the facade. My friendship with Derek also deepened into a comfortable domesticity. We were a well-oiled machine of shared expenses and mutual respect. He never questioned me when I came home late from a bonfire, smelling of wood smoke, and I never said a word when he'd have a girl from the docks over for the night. Our room was a sanctuary of unspoken acceptance. It was a Tuesday night, one of the slowest at Richie's, that the first crack appeared in my carefully managed new world. The air was thick and humid, promising a thunderstorm. The only customers were a few old men nursing beers and a young couple on a date, awkwardly pushing a puck back and forth on the air hockey table. I was behind the counter, wiping it down for the 10th time, when the bell over the door chimed. I looked up, a generic "Welcome to Richie's" on my lips, and froze. It was my father. He stood just inside the doorway, blinking in the neon-tinged gloom, looking utterly and completely out of place. He wasn't in his work uniform or his usual at-home attire of a worn t-shirt and jeans. He was wearing a cheap, ill-fitting suit, the kind a man wears to a wedding or a funeral. His face was pale, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on me. For a heart-stopping second, my blood ran cold. My first instinct, primal and deeply ingrained, was that he had come for me. He had found me. The truce was over. I felt my shoulders tense, my body automatically bracing for a confrontation, for the shouting, for the inevitable judgment. He took a few hesitant steps into the room, his gaze fixed on me. There was no anger in his eyes. There was something else, something I had never seen there before, a raw, desperate uncertainty. He looked lost. "Alex," he said, his voice rough and used. He still couldn't bring himself to use my chosen name. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my own voice flat, betraying none of the turmoil raging inside me. My hands, still holding the damp rag, were gripping it so tightly my knuckles were white. Your step-grandmother," he began, his voice cracking on the word. "Brenda's mother. She had a stroke. She's at the hospital in Wilmington. It's not good." The news hit me with a strange, disconnected ping. I barely knew the woman. I had met her only a handful of times at awkward holiday gatherings. But that wasn't what mattered. What mattered was the look on my father's face. The rigid, unshakable pillar of my childhood, the man who had always been so certain, so in control, looked like he was about to shatter. "Brenda's with her now," he continued, his eyes not quite meeting mine. "And the kids are with a neighbor." I didn't want to be alone in the house. He finally looked at me, a silent, desperate plea in his eyes. I didn't know where else to go. The confession hung in the air between us, thick and heavy as the impending storm. I didn't know where else to go. He had driven 40 miles, wearing a suit meant for paying respects, not because he needed me to do anything, but because in his moment of crisis, the son he had all but disowned was the only port he could find. The irony was staggering. The old me, the reactive, defensive Alex, would have met his vulnerability with a wall of cold anger. I would have pointed out that he had made his choice, that he had no right to seek comfort from the person he had driven away. But the lesson of the water was still fresh in my mind. You don't fight the current. You move with it. I looked at the lost, broken man standing in the middle of the pool hall, a place he so clearly did not belong, and I felt something shift. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even pity. It was a simple, stark recognition of a shared, flawed humanity. "Rick," I called out, my voice surprisingly steady. Rick looked up from his paperwork behind the bar. "I have a family emergency. I have to go." Rick just nodded. "Go. Ethan can close up." I untied the grimy apron from around my waist and tossed it on the counter. I walked around the bar, my footsteps echoing in the quiet room. "I'll drive you," I said to my father. It wasn't a question. The drive to Wilmington was the longest 40 miles of my life. The promised storm finally broke, rain lashing against the windshield in violent, wind-driven sheets. The wipers of the old Valiant struggled to keep up, their rhythmic squeak and slap the only sound in the car besides the roar of the engine and the drumming rain. My father sat in the passenger seat, a silent, hulking shadow. He stared straight ahead, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. He didn't speak, and I didn't try to make him. There were no words that could bridge the chasm between us. What could I possibly say? "Sorry for your loss? Everything will be okay?" They were hollow platitudes, meaningless in the face of the vast, unspoken history that filled the car. We arrived at the hospital, a sterile, fluorescent beacon in the stormy darkness. I parked the car and we walked in together, the automatic doors hissing open to receive us. I followed him through a maze of quiet, antiseptic-smelling corridors to the waiting room for the intensive care unit. Brenda was there, slumped in a hard plastic chair, her face pale and tear-streaked. She looked up as we entered, her eyes widening in surprise when she saw me. She stood up and rushed into my father's arms, her body racked with silent sobs. He held her, his own face a mask of stoic grief. I stood awkwardly by the door, an intruder in their private sorrow. I had done my duty. I had been the driver. My role was finished. "I should go," I said quietly. My father turned, his arms still around Brenda. He looked at me, and for a fleeting second, his mask slipped. I saw a flicker of gratitude, of something akin to shame. "Thank you for the ride," he managed to say. I just nodded and turned to leave. As I walked back down the long, silent corridor, the squeak of my own worn sneakers on the linoleum floor sounded unnervingly loud. I hadn't fixed anything. I hadn't healed any wounds. but I had shown up. I had met his crisis not with resistance, but with a quiet, steady presence. I hadn't done it for him. I had done it for me. It was a different kind of strength, not the strength of a rock, but the strength of a river that, when faced with an unexpected obstacle, simply flows around it. I drove back to the beach through the tail end of the storm, the rain now a steady, mournful drizzle. The adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation and the drive had evaporated, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. I felt hollowed out, scoured clean by the intensity of the night. When I stumbled back into the room, Derek was asleep, his quiet breathing a comforting presence in the dark. I didn't bother turning on a light. I just peeled off my damp clothes, slipped on an old t-shirt, and collapsed onto the lumpy sofa, but sleep wouldn't come. My mind was a turbulent sea of images: my father's lost expression, Brenda's tear-streaked face, the sterile indifference of the hospital hallway. My father had come to me. It was a fact I couldn't ignore, a stone dropped into the placid surface of my new life. And the ripples were spreading. My carefully constructed narrative, the one where I was the exile, the triumphant survivor who had escaped and left the past behind, was now complicated. He had needed something, and in the entire landscape of his life, I was the one he had turned to. It didn't fit. It confused the clean lines of my anger and my hard-won independence. The next few days were strange. I went to work, I joked with Ethan, I played a game of pool with Chloe, but a part of my mind was elsewhere, adrift. I felt a low-grade, humming anxiety, a feeling of waiting for the other shoe to drop. It dropped on Friday afternoon. My phone, the shared landline in the hallway of the rooming house, rang. It was Brenda. Her voice was thin and shaky. Her mother had passed away that morning. After the requisite, awkward condolences, she got to the point. "The funeral is on Sunday," she said. "Frank, he wants you to be there. He asked me to call." The request was a punch to the gut. It was one thing to be a crisis driver in the middle of the night. It was another thing entirely to stand beside them in a church, to play the part of the dutiful son in the theater of their grief. It felt like a trap, a lure to pull me back into the orbit I had fought so hard to escape. I don't have anything to wear," I stammered, the excuse flimsy even to my own ears. It was the first thing I could think of that wasn't a flat, angry no. "That's okay, honey," Brenda said, her voice surprisingly gentle. "Don't you worry about that. Just, if you could come. It would mean a lot to him. He won't say it, but it would." I hung up the phone, my hand trembling. I felt cornered. A no felt cruel, a petty refusal in the face of their loss. But a yes felt like a surrender, a step back into a role I no longer knew how to play. I went to find Chloe. I found her on her break, sitting on an overturned milk crate in the alley behind her restaurant, smoking a cigarette. I told her everything. She listened patiently, taking slow drags, letting the smoke curl into the humid air. "So, what are you going to do?" she asked when I finished. "I don't know," I admitted, running a hand through my hair in frustration. "It feels like a test, and I don't know what the right answer is." "Maybe there isn't a right answer," she said, flicking her cigarette butt into a puddle. "Maybe there's just your answer." She looked at me, her gaze steady. "The question isn't what your dad wants or what Brenda wants. The question is, what does Lex want? What feels true to the person you are right now, not the person you were?" Her words cut through the noise in my head. She was right. I had been so focused on my father's motivations, on the potential trap, that I hadn't stopped to ask myself a fundamental question. What did I want? Did I want to punish him with my absence? Or did I want to prove, to myself more than anyone, that I was no longer the scared kid who ran from difficult situations? That I was strong enough to walk into the heart of my past without losing myself in it? The answer, when it came, was surprisingly clear. It wasn't about him. It was about me. "I need to go shopping," I said. Shopping was an act of tactical precision. It wasn't about finding something my father would approve of. It was about finding something that I could inhabit without feeling like a fraud. Chloe, who had an uncanny eye for thrift store gems, came with me. We bypassed the men's section entirely. The suits there were relics of another era, broad-shouldered and boxy, designed for a masculinity that felt as foreign to me as a spacesuit. Instead, we navigated the crowded racks of the women's department, a territory I had only ever explored in secret. This time, there was no shame, only purpose. The trick, Chloe explained, her fingers expertly flicking through hangers, is to ignore what it's supposed to be and see what it could be. We found the pieces one by one. A pair of simple, well-tailored black slacks that fit my narrow frame perfectly. A soft, cream-colored silk blouse that buttoned on the wrong side, but draped beautifully. The final, crucial piece was a long, unstructured black jacket, almost like a duster coat that had no distinct gender markers. It was elegant and fluid. When I put it all on in the cramped, dusty-smelling dressing room, I looked in the mirror and saw neither Alex nor a caricature of a woman. I saw Lex, reflected back at me in shades of black and cream. The outfit was my armor, and for the first time, it was armor of my own choosing. It was a statement of quiet defiance, a way of showing up on my own terms. The day of the funeral was gray and overcast, the sky a perfect mirror of the somber mood. I drove to the church, the silk of the blouse cool against my skin. I pulled my long hair back into a low, neat ponytail at the nape of my neck. I wore no makeup, save for a clear, protective coat on my lips. My only adornment was the simple silver hoops in my ears. I slipped into a back pew just as the service was beginning, my entrance going largely unnoticed in the quiet shuffle of mourners. From my vantage point, I could see my father and Brenda in the front row. He sat ramrod straight, his back a rigid line of military discipline, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. The service was a blur of hymns and eulogies. I felt a profound sense of detachment, an anthropologist observing the strange grief rituals of a tribe I no longer belonged to. But when my father was called upon to say a few words, a knot tightened in my stomach. He walked to the pulpit, his steps heavy. He spoke about his mother-in-law, his voice thick and strained. But then he faltered. He looked out over the small congregation, his eyes scanning the faces, and, for a moment, I was sure he was looking for me. His gaze swept past the back pew without recognition. He saw a stranger in a black jacket, a person who didn't fit the image of the son he was expecting to see. And in that moment of non-recognition, I felt a strange and powerful sense of victory. He couldn't see me because he wasn't looking for me. He was looking for Alex. The fact that I could sit there, in plain sight, and be invisible to him, was proof that I had truly changed. After the service, as people milled around outside, I planned to slip away unnoticed. But Brenda caught my eye and gestured for me to come over. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was the real test. I walked over, my steps measured and calm. It was a beautiful service, I said to Brenda, my voice soft. "Thank you for coming, honey," she said, squeezing my hand. My father turned. He looked at me, his eyes doing a slow, confused scan of my outfit, the soft blouse, the tailored slacks, the long jacket. I saw the flicker of cognitive dissonance in his expression, the struggle to reconcile the person standing before him with the son in his memory. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. He didn't know what to say. He had no script for this. Finally, he just nodded, a single, sharp dip of his chin. "Thanks for coming," he said, the words feeling inadequate and strained. "Of course," I replied. And that was it. No shouting, no confrontation. Just a quiet, unbridgeable gap between two people, filled with the things they could no longer say to one another. I had walked into the heart of my past, worn my truth like a shield, and walked out unscathed. As I drove away from the church, the sun finally broke through the clouds. I hadn't won a war, but I had won a quiet, crucial battle for my own sovereignty. The funeral acted as a strange sort of exorcism. Having faced my father on my own terms and survived, the lingering fear that had haunted my quiet moments began to dissipate. I felt lighter, more grounded. The constant, low-level hum of anxiety was replaced by a quiet confidence. I had proven to myself that I could navigate the complexities of my past without being dragged under. This newfound confidence began to manifest in other areas of my life. One evening at Richie's, Marcus, the lanky cook from the bonfire, brought his acoustic guitar to work. During a lull, he sat on a stool by the pinball machines and started picking out a tune. "Ethan, ever the instigator, called out from behind the bar. "Hey, Lex. Marcus isn't the only one who can play. Show him what you got." A year ago, I would have frozen, mumbled an excuse, and retreated into the shadows. But the water doesn't resist, it flows. I felt a nervous flutter, but also a spark of something else, desire. I missed playing. "My hands are dirty," I said, a playful half-protest. "Wash 'em." Ethan grinned. I did. And a few moments later, I was holding Marcus's guitar. It was a beautiful, deep-bodied Martin, much nicer than the beat-up acoustic Leo had given me. It felt solid and resonant in my hands. The handful of regulars and the few tourists in the place turned to watch, their curiosity piqued. I didn't play a rock song or a folk ballad. I played the only thing that felt true in that moment. I played a simple, melancholic instrumental piece I had composed myself during the long, quiet afternoons in my room. It wasn't technically brilliant, but it was mine. It was a song full of unresolved chords and quiet, searching melodies, a song that sounded like walking on the beach on an overcast day. I closed my eyes and let my fingers find their way along the fretboard. The notes filled the smoky air of the pool hall, weaving a delicate, sad beauty through the noise of the video games and the clack of pool balls. For those 2 minutes, I wasn't an employee or a runaway or someone's child. I was just the music. When the last note faded, there was a beat of surprised silence. Then, someone started clapping. It was one of the old men from the bar. Soon, the others joined in a small, scattered but genuine round of applause. I felt a blush creep up my neck, a mixture of embarrassment and pride. Marcus looked at me, his eyes wide with surprise and respect. "Dude," he said, "I didn't know you could play like that." "What was that?" "Just something I was working on," I mumbled, handing the guitar back to him as if it were hot. The next day, Marcus approached me as I was coming in for my shift. "Hey, Lex," he said, looking uncharacteristically serious. "So, my band, we've been looking for a second guitarist. Someone who can add more texture, more melody. The guy we had just wasn't cutting it." He paused, rubbing the back of his neck. "I know it's a long shot, but after hearing you play last night, would you ever consider auditioning?" My heart stopped. A band. It was a fantasy I had entertained in my most private moments, a dream that belonged to a life I never thought I could actually have. It was terrifying. It meant stepping out from behind the counter, out from the shadows, and onto a stage, under lights, where people would really look at me. But the voice of fear was quieter now. It was being drowned out by another, more insistent voice, the voice that had tasted freedom, the voice that had chosen its own armor, the voice that whispered, "Be like water. Flow toward it." "When's the audition?" I asked. The audition was held in the drummer's sweltering, cramped garage, a space that smelled of stale beer, old carpet, and ambition. The band was called the Drifters, a fittingly beach town name. Besides Marcus on rhythm guitar and vocals, there was a quiet, intense girl named Sarah on bass, and the energetic, perpetually grinning drummer, Ben. They were a tight-knit trio, their easy banter a language I didn't yet speak. I felt like an outsider, my hands sweating as I plugged my beat-up electric guitar, a cheap Telecaster copy I'd bought with 2 weeks' pay from Richie's, into a small, buzzing amplifier. They wanted to hear me play, so I played the only thing I knew how to do. I improvised. Marcus started a simple chord progression, Ben kicked into a steady, hypnotic beat, and Sarah laid down a bass line that was both simple and profound, the anchor for the entire sound. I listened for a moment, letting the music wash over me, and then I took a breath and began to play. I didn't try to impress them with fast solos or flashy licks. Instead, I did what I did best. I found the spaces between their notes. I wove delicate, arpeggiated melodies around Marcus's chords, creating a counterpoint that added a layer of shimmering, melancholic texture. I played with feedback, letting single notes hang and bloom in the humid air. I was adding color, atmosphere, a sense of longing to their straightforward rock sound. I was painting with sound. When the song finally ground to a halt, the three of them were silent, looking at each other. Ben was the first to speak, a wide grin splitting his face. "Whoa," he said. "That was different." In a good way. Sarah, the bassist, nodded slowly, her eyes thoughtful. "You don't play like a lead guitarist," she said. It wasn't an accusation. It was an observation. "You play like a composer." "That's what we need," Marcus said, his voice filled with a new excitement. "I've been trying to find that sound, that something else. You've got it." And, just like that, I was in. Rehearsals became the new anchor of my week. Twice a week, I'd haul my gear to that hot, crowded garage, and for 3 hours, the outside world would cease to exist. The four of us were creating something together, a sound that was uniquely ours. My anxieties, my past, my complicated identity, none of it mattered in that room. The only thing that mattered was finding the right note, locking into the groove, feeling that magical, unspoken connection when four separate musicians suddenly become one cohesive entity. It was in the music that I found a new way to express the parts of myself that had no words. My melodic lines were filled with the quiet sadness of my past, but also the tentative hope of my future. The swells of feedback were my anger and frustration, given a voice that wasn't destructive, but beautiful. One evening, after a particularly good rehearsal, Sarah offered me a ride home. She was quiet and observant, and I often felt she saw more than she let on. As we drove, she broke the comfortable silence. "You know," she said, her eyes on the road, "the way you play, it's like you're telling a story without any words." She paused. "You must have one hell of a story to tell." I looked out the window at the passing streetlights, a small smile on my face. "I'm working on it," I said. It was the truest thing I had ever said. And for the first time, I felt like I had found the harmony to go with the melody. Our first gig was at a dive bar down the coast called the Sandpiper, a place notorious for its sticky floors and brutally honest regulars. It was the trial by fire for every new band in the area. If you could survive a Saturday night at the Sandpiper, you could play anywhere. The days leading up to the show were a blur of nervous energy. The weight of it felt different than any challenge I had faced before. The funeral, the confrontation with my father, those were battles I had fought in the shadows, for an audience of one, myself. This was different. This was stepping voluntarily onto a brightly lit stage and inviting the world to look, to listen, and to judge. The night of the gig, my stomach was a knot of terrified butterflies. As we loaded our gear onto the tiny, makeshift stage in the corner of the bar, the place was already filling up with a rough-looking crowd of fishermen, bikers, and sun-worn locals. No one paid us any attention. We were just part of the furniture until we gave them a reason not to be. "Don't look them in the eye," Marcus advised, his own voice tight with nerves. "Just find a spot on the back wall and stare at it. Pretend they're not even here." It was the exact opposite of what I needed to do. Pretending, hiding, becoming invisible, that was Alex's playbook. Lex needed to do this differently. As I plugged in my guitar, I made a decision. I wasn't going to hide. Not tonight. I had spent the afternoon carefully getting ready. I was wearing my favorite outfit, the tailored black slacks, a vintage, deep purple silk shirt, and the long, flowing black jacket. I had taken extra time with my hair, and there was a subtle hint of mascara defining my eyes. I wasn't in costume. I was simply fully myself. The moment came. Then counted off, the sticks clicking together, and the first chord of our opening song crashed through the bar. The noise level dropped slightly as a few heads turned. We launched into our set, a mix of Marcus's gritty rock anthems and the more atmospheric, textured songs where my contributions shone. I ignored Marcus's advice. I didn't stare at the back wall. I looked at the crowd. I saw the skepticism, the boredom, the outright indifference on their faces. And I played right at them. I poured every ounce of my fear, my anger, my quiet joy, and my defiant hope into the notes that flowed from my fingers. I closed my eyes, swayed with the music, and let the melodies I had written in the solitude of my room fill this loud, judgmental space. Something started to happen around the fourth song. A few heads in the crowd started to nod along to the beat. A couple near the front stopped talking and turned to watch us. By the time we launched into our final song, our most ambitious, a slow-burning instrumental that built from a single, shimmering guitar note into a cathartic wall of sound, we had them. The bar was quiet, attentive. They were listening. When the last chord faded into feedback, a beat of silence hung in the air, just like it had in the pool hall. Then, the place erupted. It wasn't polite applause, it was a roar. It was loud, chaotic, and utterly, astonishingly beautiful. Whistles and shouts came from the bar. The bikers were banging their beer mugs on the tables. We stood there on stage, panting and drenched in sweat, blinking in the lights. We had done it. We had survived the sandpiper. After we packed up, a grizzled fisherman with a beard like steel came up to me as I was coiling a cable. "You kids are all right," he grunted. He pointed a thick, calloused finger at me. "And you," he said, his eyes surprisingly sharp. "The sounds you make with that thing, they ain't from around here." He meant it as a compliment, the highest praise a local could give an outsider. I didn't know how right he was. The music wasn't from around here. It was from a place of fear and silence and solitude. And tonight, for the first time, I had set it free. The success at the Sandpiper was a turning point. We started getting more gigs, other dive bars, college parties, even a small outdoor festival. We were becoming a real band, our name whispered with a certain local buzz. And with each performance, my confidence grew. The stage became my sanctuary, the one place where the different parts of me, the quiet observer, the defiant survivor, the expressive artist, could all coexist in perfect harmony. Lex was no longer just a name I called myself in the privacy of my room. She was the person who commanded a stage, who spoke a language of melody and feedback that people wanted to hear. My life settled into a new, exhilarating rhythm: work at Richie's, rehearsals in the garage, and gigs on the weekends. My friendship with Chloe and Derek was my anchor, and the band was my wings. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving, I was building something. One cool evening in late autumn, about 6 months after I had driven away from the trailer park, I came home from a gig, my ears still ringing, the phantom energy of the crowd still buzzing in my veins. The room was empty. Derek was on a rare overnight fishing trip, and the silence was absolute. I went into our shared bathroom to wash the smoke and sweat from my face. As I splashed cold water on my skin and toweled off, I looked up and met my own eyes in the medicine cabinet mirror. And I froze. For years, I had seen a stranger in the mirror. First, it was the boy Alex, whose face felt like a mask. Then, it was the tentative emergence of the girl in the mirror, a secret friend, a future promise. Even as Lex, the reflection was often an object of study, a work in progress, a persona to be refined and perfected. But tonight was different. Tonight, I didn't see a project. I didn't see a disguise or a persona. I simply saw me. The long hair, the silver hoops, the strong line of my jaw softened by the arch of my brow. The eyes that held the quiet sadness of my past, but also the bright, defiant spark of my present. The lips that I had once painted in secret, now just my own. All the disparate pieces I had been trying to assemble, to force into a coherent whole, had finally, quietly settled. There was no more boy in the mirror or girl in the mirror. There was no more Alex versus Lex. The reflection looking back at me was simply a person. A person who played guitar in a band, who worked in a pool hall, who had friends, who had a past, and who was, against all odds, building a future. The war between the different parts of myself was over, not with a victory for one side, but with a quiet, unconditional peace treaty. A slow smile spread across my face, a genuine, unforced smile that reached my eyes. I leaned closer to the mirror, my breath fogging the glass. "Hello," I whispered to the person looking back at me. "It's nice to finally meet you." And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the answer. I knew who I was. I was home.